Well, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is travelling to Tuvalu this week for the Pacific Islands Forum.
Australia has been criticised in the past by its Pacific neighbours for not doing enough to combat climate change, and leaders say that will be topping the forum's agenda. For more on this, we're talking now with Dr. Tess Cain, who's an Adjunct Associate Professor at Griffith Asia University. Thanks very much for your time this morning. It seems to me, ahead of this Pacific Forum, that there are dualling agendas going on. Do you agree?
Well, certainly, as you say, the Pacific Island leaders have made it very clear where their priorities are, and they really want to make sure that there's something very significant happening around climate change. But when it comes to what Australia's agenda is, as a member of the forum, I think we can expect Mr Morrison to possibly try and focus on other aspects of the regional agenda and try and play down the climate change issue, because it's quite problematic for him in that space.
What do you think the particular focus will be for Scott Morrison?
Well, I think Mr Morrison, he's obviously invested an awful lot in the Pacific Step Up, which he's made a signature of foreign policy under his leadership, and he's spent quite a lot of time and effort developing personal relationships with individual leaders. This is his first run out at the Pacific Islands Forum, because he didn't go last year. So he'll be wanting to talk about how Australia is contributing to other activities, such as protecting fisheries from illegal and unreported fishing, and other aspects of security, whether it's cybersecurity or maritime security. But he's not going to be able to avoid the big issue when it comes to what the Pacific Island leaders are concerned about.
That's right. They are pushing for harder and stronger action on climate change. What does meaningful action look like, according to them?
Well, for them, they're fairly clear in that where they see Australia lagging is in relation to meaningful policy around cutting emissions and climate change mitigation. They're fully aware of the investments that Australia makes in climate change adaptation and building resilience in the region. And obviously, Australia plays a very important part when it comes to disaster response. But when it comes to mitigation, then I think there's a very strong perception, and an increasingly vocal one, that the Pacific sees that Australia is really dragging the chain on that.
Given the cuts to Australia's aid budget and also our climate change policies, does Australia have to repair its relationship in the Pacific region?
Australia has really strong relationships in the region, and they go back a long time, and they're based around a number of different things. There are people-to-people links, there are education links, there are migration links. So the relationship is very present, and it's not going away, and there's certainly no sense that the Pacific Island leaders don't want an ongoing and continuing relationship with Australia. But it does make it very hard when the Prime Minister tries to use the language of Pacific family. It makes it very hard for Pacific Island leaders to really buy into that fully when the big brother, if you like, doesn't appear to be listening to what the rest of the family says is important for them.
You mentioned that Pacific Step-Up policy. There is anxiety among Western nations over China's growing influence in the region, particularly through aid projects. And Western nations are pushing to curb that influence. Is it working?
Well, China has been a partner of a number of Pacific Island countries, not all of them, for quite some time. So China's relationships in the region aren't new. The nature of those relationships has changed recently, and that is what has prompted this re-engagement on the part of a number of Western countries, including Australia. And I think everyone in the Pacific is very well aware of the fact that they are receiving a lot more attention, and they're fairly savvy as to what the cause of that is. But I don't think anyone's expecting those countries that have established relationships with China to be giving them away. I think the position of a number of Pacific Island leaders, which we've heard, whether it's from the Prime Minister of Samoa or the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea most recently, is that their foreign policy is based on being friends to all and enemies to none. So they see the best road for them is to be able to have options and to be able to choose to work with a range of partners depending on the priorities that they want to focus on.
And is there a consideration that they might be able to use that as leverage to push for better policies on climate change, for example?
I think that I haven't heard anyone say, well, you know, we're going to move closer to China if you don't come to the table on climate change. And I don't think that we're looking at anything quite so blunt or as crude as that. But I think the reality is that in the overall mix of discussing geostrategic issues and discussing regional relationships, that the climate change issue is one that is very close to the hearts and minds of Pacific Island leaders, and they find it confusing and frustrating that Australia can't seem to get on the same page.
Are there concerns in the Pacific region that they might be caught in the middle of this global power struggle?
Yes, there are definitely really serious concerns that whilst they are concerned about security, and they've made it clear what they see the biggest threat to their security, which is the impacts of climate change, they're concerned that other powers, whether it's Australia or the US, are more concerned about securitisation. And we've already seen people raising quite significant concerns, saying that they don't want to see a militarisation of the region by anybody.
All right, Dr. Tess Newton-Cain, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Joanna.